Welcome to the revision topic for war. In this we'll be covering the reasons for and against war, what religious believers think, and some big questions such as are nuclear weapons okay? One of the important things to consider is why do people go to war? Some people might go to war to defend their country because they have no other choice. They might go to war to defend their beliefs, their religion, their freedom or their way of life, or they wish to extend these. That means they might want to invade another country to make them live in their way. They might want to defend an ally. For example, we were allied with Poland at the beginning of the Second World War. Or they wish to gain wealth and power, so they might want to take over another country for personal gain. They might want to get rid of a leader, such as a dictator. An example of this would be Saddam Hussein in the Iraq War. Or they may wish to stop atrocities happening. So if we know that another country is treating their people particularly badly, we might get involved. With any war, there will be consequences. This means things that happen because of the war. Some of these are positive things, such as freedom from an occupying country that's invaded you, or positive change in society. Most are negative, bad things, such as death and injury to both soldiers and civilians. Civilians being people who aren't actually fighting in the war that might get harmed otherwise. Think women and children. It destroys the economy. Not many people are going to go shopping if there's tanks rolling around the high street or next to a local shopping centre. It also does damage to infrastructure. This means things like the roads, electricity, gas and water supplies. It's very difficult for a country to operate with these things damaged. There's also issues such as disease, famine and homelessness. Disease often comes from the fact that a lot of things are dirty, aren't being cleaned up, and potential hazards because of dirty water. This is because there's damage to the infrastructure. If people can't get food because of this, there's also famine, which means people are starving, and if people's homes are destroyed, the obvious result is homelessness. Another issue with war is the fact that it is expensive. Both countries involved will actually have to spend a lot of money to make sure they maintain their war effort. Guns, bombs, planes and so on are not cheap. The key themes that you need to understand for this topic are peace. This is the absence of conflict. Some people also refer to peace as being a feeling of well-being. That means they might feel peace and calm even if they are in a conflict. The idea of justice. This is people being treated fairly. If people are treated fairly, there's likely to be a lot less conflict. And also the idea of the sanctity of life, that all life is special, sacred or holy because it was created by either God or Allah. This means that you shouldn't be taking lives, and to kill is against the Ten Commandments in Christianity. Christianity, when it's looking at the idea of peace, has several different ideas. There's the idea of pacifism. This means someone who believes that all violence is wrong and there should never be a reason for it, no matter what. They believe this because the Bible teaches the sanctity of life, which is the idea that life is sacred or holy, created by God. This means that they are against killing. War also causes damage to the environment, society, and, as mentioned before, causes the loss of life. Islam also has strong views on the idea of peace. The root of the word Islam actually means peace. It teaches that peace and reconciliation, which means making things up and getting on, are better than fighting. They believe that Muslims should not seek revenge, they should forgive others for things that they do wrong. Just war and holy war are ways of expressing why it's alright to have a war. The idea of just war is the war will prevent a greater evil. That means stop something worse happening. It's got to have a just cause, which means a legitimate reason such as defending yourself. It needs to be lawfully declared by the government of the countries involved. It needs to have good intention. Basically, are you going to war for selfish reasons or to make the world a better place? It should be a last resort. You shouldn't just go, I don't like that country, let's bomb it. And there should be a good chance of success. There's no point sending everyone to die. Fought by just means. This means not killing civilians and no excessive force. The idea of just means is part of the argument about why people should not use nuclear weapons. Now, holy war is generally also regarded as a just war, but it must have religious goals. It must be authorised by God or a spiritual leader, and those who take part will receive a spiritual reward. An example of this would be the Crusades. Islam teaches about Jihad. The greater jihad is a struggle against temptation. The lesser is the military version. It must be started and controlled by a religious leader. It has to have a just cause, again, a good reason to happen. It should be a last resort. You shouldn't just be attacking as the first option. It should keep suffering to a minimum. This means avoiding damage to civilians. It's also another reason why they would be opposed to nuclear weapons. It should protect trees, crops and animals, so minimise the damage to surrounding areas. It should not be to get territory or as an act of aggression. It should aim to restore peace and freedom, and it should enable the release of prisoners of war. However, a key difference for Muslims would be those who are killed are seen as martyrs who will enter paradise. You'll notice, if you're quite smart, that this list of things doesn't actually match the reasons why people are committing terrorist attacks. We'll come on to terrorism later. You're almost guaranteed to be asked about organisations which help out. Two good examples are the Red Cross for Christians and the Red Crescent for Islam. They're two organisations that do help the victims of war. They're humanitarian agencies. That means to do things like providing food, medical assistance and shelter to people who are in need because of the conflict. Although we don't study Buddhism, the Dalai Lama is an excellent example of someone who worked for peace and refused to be involved in violent conflict. In 1950, China invaded Tibet. The Chinese treated the Tibetans very badly and many fled to India, including the Dalai Lama. He's the head of the Buddhist religion. He refused to use violence to win back his country. He works around the world for peace and has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in this. He urges people in conflicts all over to find peaceful solutions based on the ideas of tolerance and respect. The chance you'll be asked about either the UN or NATO. The United Nations has 192 member states and works globally to protect human rights and work for peace. NATO is a North Atlantic Treaty Organisation. This isn't designed as an organisation working for peace. It's an organisation that looks to defend its members. It was formed after the Second World War. Basically, if one country is attacked, everyone will respond. I probably don't need to tell you what terrorism is. You see a lot of this on the television, you see all the news reports of things that have happened, most famously things like 7/7 and 9/11. It is the unlawful use of extreme violence. It's normally against civilians. That's what separates it from normal warfare. Most people believe because of this it can never be justified. However, one argument that does support terrorism is the end justifies the means. That means do whatever you can to defeat your enemies, even if you are killing women and children. Weapons of mass destruction are weapons designed to kill a large number of people at once. They include chemical weapons, which means things like poisons and toxics, biological weapons, which means purposely infecting people with disease and plagues, and nuclear weapons, which are the large atomic ones which destroy huge areas of land and leave the ground polluted with radiation for years afterwards. Most people would argue that these aren't appropriate and should not be used in just war or jihad. Nuclear weapons are a massive issue. You'll often get a big question on this. You've got to be able to give an argument for nuclear weapons to say why we should have them and against them, which means why we shouldn't have nuclear weapons. For example, they're a deterrent. That means they put people off attacking us. A last resort, you would use them only if you are desperate, not just as the first option. And the idea of self-defense, that every country should have the right to be safe. Reasons against nuclear weapons would be proliferation. That's a fancy word meaning that more and more people are getting them, which makes the world a more and more dangerous place. It's not just, which links into the religious arguments of just war and jihad. Make sure if you get a question on this, you mention Muslims and not allowing it because of that, and Christians and not allowing it because of that. It kills civilians, large numbers of them. It damages the environment. It's mass murder. And the massive risk that if terrorists got their hands on nuclear weapons, they could hit it at any target without fear. The other big issue is the idea of sanctity of life. Remember, both religions believe in this, so you could use that to argue that that kind of loss of life is never acceptable.